This court is now resumed. You may be seated.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
I had neglected to enter my second binder as a lettered exhibit. I'd
Aha,
like to do that now
thank you. And how are we doing it?
as a letter for now.
A separate letter
Yes,
from the first one?
yes.
We don't want to make them a single exhibit, volume 1, volume 2.
I think
I'm
that's
just
fine.
saying, we'll run out of letters in the alphabet
Nope,
soon
that-
enough.
That sounds like a better.
So what is it? H?
H.
H, yeah.
For clarity, is this going to be H.1? Will they both be H? Will they be
I would, I would
H.1?
say it's exhibit H, volume 1, volume 2.
Okay, thank you.
That makes sense.
Okay. If that's, you're good with that, sir?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you, Your
thank
Honor.
Oh, okay.
Just take a minute. Go ahead.
Justice Hennessy, I've got a compendium of documents I'll be referring to, and I've provided it to Ms. Pelkey. So hopefully there'll be a copy for you, and I have a copy for the witness as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
My colleague, Ms. Sang, has just delivered it electronically as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And my colleague, Ms. McNamara, will be putting some slides up on the screen as we go through them in the paper version as well.
All right. And they match what's in the compendium?
Yes, they do. There may be a couple of extra pages from the report, for example, that Ms. McNamara may pull up that aren't in the volume, but generally speaking, though, I'll ensure that when I speak about something that's in the volume, it'll also be on the screen.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Hutchings, you probably know I'm Glynis Evans. I'm counsel with the Attorney General of Canada.
Yes, ma'am.
The first thing I want to deal with is spectrum.
Okay.
Going through your slides and reports, I was confused by conflicting numbers in respect of the spectrum net revenues. So I want to go through to make sure the court has the right numbers.
Sure.
So the first thing I want to look at is your slide 94, and that's behind tab 1.
Okay.
Behind tab 1, I have a couple of pages from your trial demonstratives,
Okay.
and I'd like you to look at page 94.
Okay, I recognize it.
Great. So that
But the-
chart,
Sorry. On the screen share, like part of the page is cut off. I'm not sure what's up with that. Like, if you want me to look at the numbers, it's not on the screen.
yeah.
I see it in the
is
printed copy.
possible to fix that?
I'm not able to adjust.
Okay, I'm happy to look at the printed copy.
Exit out of full screen.
Maybe we could go off the record for just a moment. to
Please.
do that, and I'm
Thank you.
sorry about this.
It works now.
Thank you all for your assistance, and we're back on the record.
Great, thank you. So looking at that chart, you have there the total as shown as 29 million.
Yes.
And I just want to make it clear, this is the total auction spectrum revenues in the Robinson Superior Territory. Is that right?
That's right.
And in addition to auction revenues, there are also non-auction revenues.
That's right.
And the non-auction revenues relate to, for example, radio licenses that were paid for not through an auction process.
That's correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make that clear because in your testimony the other day, you had indicated that this was the total spectrum revenues that Canada attributed to the Robinson Superior Treaty Territory. So I want to make sure everyone was clear that that's only the auction revenues, not the total.
Yes, my mistake. Yes, no, slide 288 of my demonstratives has the auction and non-auction and then the total
Yeah,
revenues.
we'll get to that one too.
Oh, okay,
Thank you.
got it. Yeah.
Yeah,
no,
I just want to, as I said, I think part of the problem is, one of the things you mentioned was that, I'm going to call it ISED. It stands for Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. We belong at ISED.
Yeah.
And you'd mentioned that ISED had provided a couple of different versions of numbers. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So part of the problem, I think, in where these numbers are not adding up is because sometimes we're looking at the February 2021 numbers, and sometimes we're looking at the October 2021 numbers. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay. So
And then I've gone a step further and confounded, including auction and non-auction.
so in your original report
Mhm.
dated January 31, 2022,
That's right.
you used the first version of ISED's numbers, which dated from February 2021.
That's right.
And in fact, ISED updated those numbers in October 2021.
That's right.
But for whatever reason, that updated version didn't make its way to you in time for you to prepare your January 31st,
That's right.
2022
And I
report.
think Professor Mintz and Mr. Reardon talked about that, and I updated it in my reply report. That was just an oversight, or I didn't get them. I think
You
I
didn't get them in time. Or you
Yeah.
didn't include them anyway,
Yeah, right.
but you dealt with that in your reply report. You dealt with the new numbers in your reply report.
That's right.
Okay. So, and the revised version in October 2021 was revised for two reasons. First, there was a new map
That's
of
right.
the Robinson Huron Treaty Territory.
Or Robinson Superior?
No, Robinson Huron Treaty
Oh.
Territory. And that also affected the calculations for the Robinson Superior Treaty as well.
I believe so. Yeah.
Sorry, was your question, there were two reasons for the revised number by ISED?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
The first reason was the new map, which
Mhm.
altered both the Robinson Huron numbers and the Robinson Superior numbers. Is that right?
Yes.
And the second reason for the new updated version in October 2021 was that ISED had had another round of spectrum auctions in June of 2021.
Yes.
So the numbers on slide 94 that we just looked at behind tab 1
Mhm.
are out of date because they're from your original report and they are the February 2021 numbers.
That's correct.
So let's look at slide 288, which I've also included behind tab 1. And here you've included auction revenues and non-auction revenues,
Mhm.
total revenues, costs, net revenue. And here, the source you've cited is your opening report, table 10 and work papers.
That's right.
So if we look at table 10, which is behind tab 3,
Oh, thank you. Okay.
these numbers don't add up. And I just want to clarify, it would seem it's because the table 10 numbers are the February 2021 numbers. Is that right?
Yes.
And the page 288 numbers
Mhm.
are updated numbers from October 2021. Is that right?
That's right.
So I want to go back again to table 10 behind tab 3. And here I want to correct my own mistake, which is your table 10 in your report indicates that the total net crown revenues, including both auction and non-auction, is about $43 million. That's what you said in your original report,
Yeah, that's net of expenses.
right?
That's right.
But in fact, with the new numbers, given that there was a new auction in June of 2021,
Mhm.
and the numbers have changed somewhat because the map has changed, that number's no longer accurate.
That's right.
Okay. So, and I wanted to mention that because I did advise the court in my opening statement, you may have been here, that the parties had agreed that 43 million was the total, but in fact,
Oh.
that's an old number.
Yes, sir. I think we agreed whatever, well, I don't know what you all agreed, but I thought in my reply report, updating the numbers, as Professor Minson and pointed out, there was new data available.
Okay,
That's
so
what I
let's look
would've
at that
thought.
new data then.
Okay.
I think another part of the problem with the numbers that don't match up is that most of the time you bring your numbers up to 2019. Is that right?
That's correct.
But sometimes, and that's because that's comparable then with the land revenues, the forest revenues, the mining revenues, et cetera.
That's correct.
Sometimes though, for example, we just looked at that slide 288, you have revenues from Spectrum going up to 2020.
Yes. That's correct.
And in fact, the numbers that I said provided go up to 2021.
That's correct.
So that's another reason why these charts don't necessarily all show the same numbers.
That's correct.
So the source for all of the numbers is the ISED report from October 2021. And I'd like to turn to that report.
Okay.
So it is at tab 6.
Okay. Excuse me.
So the ISED report was the source of your information on Spectrum revenues, is that right?
That's correct.
And you found the methodology that ISED used acceptable and reasonable and adopted it in its entirety?
Yes.
So let's go through it in some detail.
Okay.
I just wanted to start, I've highlighted certain portions. I want to note, first off, that this is the updated version from October 2021.
Yes.
And then on the first page, it talks about auctioned licenses.
Yes.
And it says auctions are used to allocate Spectrum licenses to those who value the spectrum the most. This value is predominantly determined by the demand for the spectrum, which in turn is determined by the costs of building network infrastructure to utilize the spectrum and the amount of revenue that can be generated by providing telecom services to consumers. Do you agree with that?
Yes. I think the first sentence is why I've said before, economists like auctions. It gets people to bid how much they value it.
And then turning the page,
Sure.
beginning of page 2, it says essentially, Spectrum has little to no value without people who are willing to pay to use it. For this reason, the value of Spectrum is calculated in terms of population coverage rather than geographic coverage. The value of Spectrum derived from a specific geographic area is therefore calculated based on the proportion of the population within a service area that falls within the specified geographic area. Do you agree with that?
Yes. I mean, I think that's true of most natural resources. You know, like the trees don't have value unless we're prepared to cut them down and do something with them.
So the value of Spectrum is calculated in terms of population in a geographic area. Is that right?
That's how I understand ISID's methodology. Yes.
And it's a methodology that you adopt in its entirety.
Yes.
So it's not the value of the land or any inherent value in the radio waves themselves, but rather the size of the population that determines the value of Spectrum in a geographic area. Is that right?
No,
Why not?
because there might be people in that geographic area, right, who want to communicate with the telecom companies. To do that communication, the telecom company wants unimpeded access on the channels or the frequencies to reach the customers. That ability to assure them of unimpeded access on the channels and to allocate them appropriately has value, right? It's a little bit like if I owned a mine and you owned all the land around it, you'd be able to extract a lot from me because I need to get my goods out and people want to come in, even though the value might be the minerals. So the value here might be the people who want telecom services, but those telecommunication providers need access, like a toll road, if you will, through the spectrum in a geographic area. Otherwise, you could set up blockers or something like that. So if you want to think about the land as the right to management in our ST, without some agreement, someone could block the spectrum and effectively make it value less.
Okay, but you've agreed with me that
Mhm.
the value of spectrum is calculated in terms of population coverage rather than geographic coverage.
Yes, absolutely.
And spectrum is different from mining and even forestry and even water hydro water rentals, in that all of those other resources can be exported from the geographic area, but spectrum cannot. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess those three can. I mean, land can't be exported. It's like the land sales and land leases. Can't export the land, but those other three, yeah.
And you can't export spectrum, of course.
Right.
Right. So again, really what makes the spectrum valuable in the Robinson Superior Treaty Territory is the population in that territory that uses that spectrum.
Yes, you're prepared to pay more, the more people who are there.
And in fact, spectrum has no value without customers in the area wanting to use it.
Yes, I think I'd accept that.
Now, there's no precise measurement of the spectrum revenues or rents in this case for a number of reasons. One is that I said auctions off or sells spectrum licenses by blocks.
Mhm.
And bidders bid on packages that include different areas. Is that correct?
That's right. We have that geographic allocation problem that all the blocks are strictly greater than
Right.
ST. Yeah,
So let's look at, if we're back at tab 6, we're looking at ISED's report.
sure.
I actually want to go to page 3 of ISED's report. There's a few passages I've highlighted there.
Okay.
In auctions where licenses have been offered for package bidding, the value of any given license can be obfuscated in a number of ways, as bidders place bids for combinations of licenses of their choosing at a single price. And it goes on to say later, for example, bidders may win a package of licenses that includes several licenses in densely populated areas, such as Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver, as well as rural and remote communities. Is that the way you understand it?
Yes.
And then further down the page, while it is likely that these calculations may still overstate the value of spectrum in rural and remote communities, ISED has not identified additional measures that allow us to further separate license values within a given package. So ISED has done the best job they can to determine a figure that could represent the value of spectrum auctions in the treaty territory, but it's imprecise. Would you agree?
I would agree. And I think it's always going to be imprecise. And that's why I didn't feel the need to come up with my own alternative estimation. Might be a slightly different number, but I also have to assume that they have a lot more confidential data than I could ever get my hands on. And so they're going to do the best job that can be done.
And later on that page, it again says that the price per megahertz per population
Mhm.
is used as a baseline measure of the value of spectrum, which once again means that the value of spectrum is a function of the population that is being served. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say the value that can be captured or extracted or that people pay for. Yeah, to your point, if there was nobody there, it would be zero.
Thanks. So then on the next page, we see that map
Mhm.
that shows how ISED calculated, tried to come up with an estimate of spectrum revenues based on their understanding of the maps superimposed with their blocks superimposed on that map.
Exactly. We're back to the slicing and dicing of Ontario. Yeah.
Okay, but it's obvious that spectrum doesn't end at the boundaries of those blocks.
I
Spectrum
don't follow.
doesn't end. You can't put a boundary on spectrum. Spectrum, depending on the wave that you're dealing with, can go for kilometers and kilometers, or it can go for short distances. It's not constrained by a boundary that ISED or anybody else you can't fence it off.
Well, I guess, there are different blocks and you can bid for the rights or get the rights in a non-auction format in different blocks. This is our podcast example. You might care a lot about 92.3 here in Sudbury, but if I go to Thunder Bay or Newfoundland, no one's going to care if I'm using 92.3. I mean, it dies out, but that's because we have arranged for it to die out. If without an arrangement or some delineation of boundaries like this one, you could set up on the outskirts, big interference towers just broadcasting nonsense on 92.3 and ruin a podcast.
Is your question, spectrum does not end at a predetermined physical boundary?
That's right.
So yeah, I
The-
feel like
the-
the spectrum continues, but the usability can end if someone has got a competing tower there.
Thank you. That's a good way to put it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Like I'm sure there's spectrum in the air here. We're all, I don't know, breathing it in or something, or feeling
right.
it, I guess.
So really what is being sold in a spectrum auction is areas in which companies can put up towers to provide service. And that service may spill over boundaries, but what's really being purchased is that space in which you can put up your towers. Is that right?
I guess it's more, the kind of exclusive right to use the channels you got in that area. And by got, I mean the channels or blocks of frequency that you either won in an auction or got in a non-auction way. It's then on you to go build the towers.
But you need the towers in order to access the spectrum.
Yeah, you need the towers, and you're only going to build the towers if you know you can broadcast your podcast on 92.3.
Right. So is it fair to say then what is being sold is areas in which companies can erect towers to provide service?
Again, I think I put it slightly differently. Areas in which they can build that tower and have the unimpeded access over that range, right? It's not just to build the tower, but build the tower and broadcast on 92.3 versus 92.7.
Okay. So I want to get to the numbers now,
Of course.
because I had said at the outset that the numbers in your report and your slides and your reply report don't all match up. So
Sure.
since I said is the source of the numbers, I just wanted to put on the record the appropriate numbers.
Okay.
So at page 7,
Page 7 or 10? Oh, page 7 of the
yeah,
same
page 7
document.
behind tab 6,
Got it.
I've highlighted there the auction revenues from the Robinson Superior Treaty Territory, including the most recent 2021 auction.
Yeah.
The total there is about $43 million.
I see
And I
that.
assume you agree with that.
I would. So it'd be about 33 million through the period of interest.
Oh, you're saying
I'm
if you were to
subtracting out the
deduct 2021.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's indicated as well below on that same page, it is likely that the total value is indicative of the value of the most densely populated licenses included within these packages, rather than the average value of all licenses in the package. Do you understand that to mean that these may be overestimations of the auction value in this Robinson Superior Territory?
Yes, I understand that, but a couple of pages ago, we had some of how they tried to account for that fact of mitigating overestimation. And I think the 2006 and 2008 that's talked about in the next paragraph, those are, I think, in our HT, not RST. But yeah, I understand this as a warning that, as discussed earlier, it's imprecise.
Right.
It might be overstated.
Thank you. Then we have, in addition to those auction revenues, there's non-auction revenues.
Mhm.
And those are shown on page 10 of ISED's paper.
9 and 10, right? It
Yeah,
kinda spills
that's right.
over the
The chart,
page.
it's a
Yeah.
chart that starts on page 9 and goes over to page 10. But we see the total there. Now here, it only goes up to 2020.
Yep.
And the total then is about 26 million. Is that right?
That's right.
That's your understanding. So the figure below that, there's a chart that shows auctions and other licensing revenues or non-auction revenues. The total in the Robinson Superior Treaty, as shown in this report from ISED dated October 2021, is about 69.6 million. And that's revenues, gross revenues. Is that right?
That's right. And as you mentioned, that includes a little bit of 2020 and a fair chunk in 2021.
Right, that includes non-auction up to 2020, but auction revenues all the way up to 2021, with there having been about $10 million in auction revenues in 2021.
That's right.
And then the final piece of the puzzle is the expenses. And again, unfortunately, these expenses only go up to 2020, but I just wanted to look at page 13. And the figure there shown for estimates of expenditures attributable to the treaty territory, to Robinson Superior Treaty Territory, is about $12 million.
That's right.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure we've all got the right numbers.
Okay.
So I want to go back and look again behind tab 1 at your slide 93.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a picture of, it's a map here.
That's right.
Now, obviously, you didn't get this exact map off of ISED's website. Am I right?
No, I got it off of another Industry Canada website set at the bottom there.
So you got this map off of an Industry Canada website.
I believe so, yeah. sms.ic.gc.ca.
Did the map that you got off of the Industry Canada website show the boundaries of the Robinson Superior
Oh.
Treaty Territory?
Sorry, no. That I got, that's the same, that's an illustrative map I've been using the whole time around. Sorry, the
Right,
little dots I got.
okay.
Sorry,
So
my
this
mistake.
map is actually not directly from an Industry Canada website.
No. The little dots are from, that's right.
Okay, so the boundary outline of the Robinson Superior Treaty Territory you have added,
That's correct.
and the legend you have added. The
That's
legend
correct.
being where it says Spectrum Towers and Robinson Superior Treaty, you've added that.
I have.
And the title, Spectrum Towers in Ontario, you have added. Is that right?
Yes.
So are you confident that these dots show Spectrum Towers in Ontario and not radio installations?
I think it would include both. I mean, I think they both broadcast through the spectrum.
So when you titled this Spectrum Towers, it really should be titled Spectrum Towers and Radio Installation, or perhaps radio installations such as Spectrum Towers.
Sorry, radio broadcast through the spectrum. Perhaps I'm not,
Well, I'm not understanding why you call this Spectrum Towers in Ontario.
okay.
My understanding is that these dots represent radio installations, which may not be the same thing as Spectrum Towers.
Could be a subset of spectrum towers.
Or Spectrum Towers could be a subset of radio installations.
I think spectrum covers both in that I said memo. I think we were looking at the radio, some of the non-auction stuff I think is about radio. So I'm not,
But you do agree with me that it may be a misnomer to call these dots Spectrum Towers. Would you agree with that?
no,
Would you agree with me that Industry Canada does not call them Spectrum Towers?
yes.
So you added this title on your own.
Oh, yeah, the font is there. I just got the pinpoints from the Industry Canada website.
So radio installations can be placed on existing posts, buildings, often on water towers. Is that right?
I don't know of all the places they can be placed, but I know they can be placed in many places. You don't just have to go build a big metal tower. That's right.
And so installations for the use of spectrum can also be placed on water towers, roofs of buildings, other kinds of structures. Is that right?
I don't know the exhaustive list of where they can be placed, but I think, yeah, they could be placed on the roofs of buildings.
And in fact, are you aware that the law requires that companies that want to build towers for spectrum must first look at sharing existing structures?
I'm not aware one way or the other.
Does that surprise you if that were the case?
No, I could imagine, we don't want to have two towers next to each other that could be consolidated. I mean, sometimes those big metal things can be a bit of an eyesore.
So back to your map here,
Yeah.
which shows radio installations in the area, which may include or overlap with spectrum towers.
Mhm.
So back to that map, then, some of these pinpoints may in fact be installations on water towers, for example.
Sure. Oh, yes. Sorry, I see your point. Yes, these are just, I guess, points from which frequencies are broadcast, whether it's a tower or the top of a building. Sorry, now I see the distinction. Yes, that's right.
So looking at this map, it struck me that there is a huge amount of territory in Ontario and in all of Canada that we should be taking advantage of. If you can get billions of dollars from auctioning spectrum in geographical areas, why don't we auction all the spectrum in that vast area of Northern Ontario and make billions of dollars?
I don't have a population overlay map here, but knowing a little bit about Canadian geography, it would be because there's not a lot of people up there. And so there wouldn't be a lot of value in purchasing spectrum rights in those areas.
So it comes back to the point then that the value of spectrum is really the population to be served by it.
I think the price you're willing to pay to use spectrum in a given area is a function of the number of people in that area. But the value of the spectrum is that value of you're paying for that right to like a toll road or an access road or a pipeline. You're paying to have that unimpeded access so we don't have interference with each other for our podcast.
So the geographic territory, and I'm thinking of that section
In the top
shown
left.
on the map at page 93 of
Okay.
your slides, the geographic territory is useless as a spectrum revenue generating space if there's no population there to use the spectrum. Is that right?
So which region are we looking at?
The whole region of Northern Ontario that's north of where you've shown the Robinson Superior Territory that doesn't have any spectrum towers.
I see. So like where the word Ontario is in light gray font there, like that area up there.
Yes,
Yeah,
we're looking at sort of northwestern Ontario.
and I imagine using ICID's allocation approach based on person megahertz, the formula we looked at a moment ago, they probably allocate none of the spectrum revenue up there.
And this gets me back to the export idea. It's not like you can say all this territory, has an inherent value because we can mine it or cut down the trees and sell them on the export market. You can't do the same with spectrum. You can't say, hey, let's make billions of dollars by auctioning off spectrum rights over the area around James Bay. Is that right?
Right, I don't know. I don't quite follow the export point, like the hundreds of thousands of acres that have been sold in RST. I can't export those either, but they still have value. And that value's gone up as more people have settled here, like land value, so I don't quite follow the export.
Yeah, I think it's just that that spectrum is so necessarily related to population. We talked before about the way you value spectrum is a function of the population you're serving.
Absolutely. And the way you value land is a function of how many other people want to buy land, which tends to be a function of population in that area.
But you might value land a certain way because it has trees on it that you can cut down.
Right. I'm talking about the unimproved value of land. Like if you wanted to put, if you wanted to go to Crown Lands and put a cottage on Hudson Bay, on James Bay, you'd probably pay less than if you wanted to put one on Georgian Bay because there's less demand, because there's less people living there.
So land has some inherent value to it because you can sell it to somebody or use it for something like cutting down the trees, for example, and selling the trees.
Right.
But spectrum doesn't have any value at all unless there are customers there to use it.
That's right. But there's I guess a blocking value, if you will, of if you wanted to put up towers broadcasting interference all throughout RST, someone would pay you a lot of money based on the population of that territory to not do that, so they could have that unimpeded access.
Okay, so I want to look at slide 92, which is the first slide behind tab 1 of the compendium.
Okay. Okay,
And here you note that spectrum is recognized as a natural resource by the government of Canada.
yes.
In your report, your original report, and in your report with Professor Stiglitz,
Mhm.
you made the point that Professors Smart and Bodway and Mintz and O'Riordan erred by accepting labels
Mhm.
assigned by the Crown that were not determinative of the underlying economics. Do you remember making that point?
I do.
And I think you made it in particular with respect to logging tax. Am I right?
Yes.
And the point being that whether you call it a logging tax or a corporate tax is not determinative of the underlying economics. Is that right?
Yes, I certainly made a point like that. If I use those words, that might be, but I'd made that point. Yeah.
So would you then agree that whether something is called a natural resource or not is not itself determinative of the underlying economics?
Of course.
So calling spectrum a natural resource is not determinative of whether spectrum should be captured by the judgment from stage one then. Would you agree with that? Maybe we should
Oh,
look at the.
Sorry, yeah, I agree with that, but I think that I don't include it as a relevant revenue because the government calls it a natural resource. I include it because it's directly or in a closely related way to the use, sale, licensing of land, including the waters. I'm making a poor quote of the judgment, but again, it's related to the licensing of the land in the same way you might have, you know, a license over given timber tract. You don't have to harvest it all, but oh, thank you. Closely related way to the use, sale, or licensing of land. Yeah, so by giving you the unimpeded access to broadcast at a given frequency in that land area, that's an assurance that no one else is going to compete with you. That's related to the use or licensing of the land.
Okay, so it doesn't actually matter that whether anyone calls it a natural resource or not. Is that right?
I mean, I don't think that's determinative, but I do think it's interesting to look at. And, you know, many of these things are natural resources that the Crown has stepped in to manage because they're owned by all Canadians. I think we cite some literature to that point as well.
So let's look at the literature.
Sure.
You've cited 3 academic articles
Mhm.
that you say here support the view of spectrum as a natural resource.
Yes.
Now, the first one,
Mhm.
on page 92, slide 92, behind tab 1, you have said that this is an article by Kathleen Cranley Glass and David M. Rhodes
Mhm.
in the McGill Law Journal, written in 1999. Now, we'll find that behind tab 7 of the compendium.
Okay. So yeah, put the wrong author down there.
Yeah, the first thing to note is that you appear to have mistaken the author. It was not, in fact, Kathleen Cranley Glass, but rather Martin C. Glass. Is that correct?
Yes,
So this was just a mistake on your part?
looks that way. I'll check what I have in the report, but
Well, this
I
is,
don't. Is it this?
you have Kathleen Cranley Glass in your report, which you've
Okay.
cited on page 92 of your slides.
Okay.
But in fact, when you look at the article, which itself is, I put it in my compendium, but I've also indicated in the index that it is, it can be found in Exhibit 1, tab 1385. So this is the copy that you provided
Okay.
with your report, 1385, and it shows then, in fact, the author was Martin C. Glass.
Okay.
So you just made a mistake. Am I right?
It looks that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is 2 pages of the PDF. I don't know if maybe I downloaded it from a different thing, but I'll have to check.
This is the PDF that was produced with your report.
Well,
And it's
only-
true, I've only included a
Okay.
couple of pages.
Yeah.
But does it help to know that Kathleen Cranley Glass was a professor in bioethics at McGill? Does that help to
No,
know that?
no.
So it would seem from the title of this page that you can see on behind tab 7, which is Exhibit 1-1385, that the actual author was Martin C. Glass.
Okay.
Do you agree with me?
Yes.
Okay, so in this particular article, this article written in 1999
Mhm.
examines different methods of spectrum allocation shortly after legislation was enacted to permit auctions and concludes that Canada should use a hybrid system. Is that your recollection of this article?
Yes.
So nowhere in this article was I able to find the term natural resource,
Okay.
but I did see that they refer to spectrum as a public resource. And that's on the next page.
Okay.
The introduction says, the radio spectrum is a public resource,
Mhm.
which is used as a medium of communication by a diverse group of entities ranging from cellular telephone companies and paging services to fire departments and air traffic controllers. Canadians benefit from spectrum-related services every day. I'm behind
Okay.
tab 7.
Okay.
Page, the first page or
The second page behind tab 7.
Thank you.
It's page 147 of the article.
Yes. And you were reading from what
I
paragraph?
was reading from the introduction.
Thank you.
It begins, the radio spectrum is a public resource.
Got it.
But it doesn't matter if it's called a natural resource or a public resource. Is that right, Mr. Hutchings?
That's right. And I think, public resource, the end of this paragraph talks about how we're going to allocate these scarce resources. Scarcity equals value to economists. The Crown is going to capture some of that benefit. So it's being managed for I think as they say here, manage it for the benefit of all Canadians. Where should that surplus go? Probably to the public purse. So I think I said that supports the view of a natural resource. I didn't mean to mislead and suggest they use the term, but public resource to me says something similar.
Yes, I think it does say something similar. You did say in your report that the academic literature, including this article, supports the view of spectrum as a natural resource. And my point is, they don't actually use the term natural resource in this paper, but you've told us already, it doesn't really matter what you call it.
Right.
It's not determinative of its underlying economics.
That's right. I think, public resource, similar thing.
So let's look at the next article you cite.
Okay.
You cite it in your report and then again on page 92 of the slides.
Okay.
This one is by Christian Herter,
Mhm.
and it was written in 1985,
That's right.
and it's behind tab 8 of the compendium.
Yes, I remember this one well, because he
Well-
opens with a story about Newfoundland.
This one, obviously, he does call it a natural resource because that's the title of the paper.
That's right.
That's right. And I just want to read what Mr. Herter says about the electromagnetic spectrum's characteristics as a natural resource,
Okay.
which is on the second page of the excerpt that I've included in the compendium. And it's highlighted there.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I see it on the screen.
And it says, as a natural resource, the electromagnetic spectrum is a part of the natural environment of the Earth and the space around it. Unlike hard minerals or petroleum, the electromagnetic spectrum is not depletable. It is always available in infinite abundance, except for that portion which is being used. When that portion of the electromagnetic spectrum is not in use, it is instantly renewable. Do you agree with that statement?
Yes. I think he goes on to compare it to a river for hydroelectricity.
Yeah, so let's turn the page then and look at the next section that I've highlighted. Starting with generally speaking.
Okay.
Generally speaking, natural resources contained within the geographic boundaries of a nation are owned by that nation. If the nation has a coastline, ownership extends to the outer limit of the territorial sea, now generally accepted as 12 miles. Equally, a nation has complete sovereignty over the airspace above its territory. Other natural resources, such as rivers or lakes, form the boundaries between two nations or traverse them and constitute shared natural resources. the uses of which under current law are enjoyed by each on an equitable basis. Then there are common property resources, the principal characteristic of which is that they are res communis, accessible to all, but not subject to appropriation by any one nation or person. The high seas and outer space are common property. The electromagnetic spectrum has many of the attributes of a common property resource. It's freely accessible to all, although as noted, the first user of a frequency goes on to say, I'm paraphrasing, provided he meets regulatory requirements, has sort of a lock on it, on that frequency. So would you agree with the characterization here of the electromagnetic spectrum as it has many of the attributes of a common property resource?
So I'm familiar with the term common property in a kind of set of dichotomies economists use about public and private goods or club goods and common property, where common property would be things like fishing quotas, something like that, in that they're renewable, but similar to what the author says in the 2 sentences at the end of the paragraph at the top of this page, that it's a limited natural resource. And the word scarce is appropriate. I'm not entirely sure about this res communis point. I do agree with him that until someone uses the spectrum, anyone can use it. But once someone has used it, it then prevents other people from using it.
Until they stop using it.
Until they stop using it. But as he says, you have a de facto lock and has virtually appropriated it. Sounds a little bit like a monopoly.
Until you, for example, lose your license, though.
Right. So
It's a time limited license, you have to bid again.
exactly.
Because once.
But it has value, and someone should be collecting that value as a public resource, common property, natural resource. One would hope it's going to be the public purse collecting that.
Okay, so I want to look at the last article you cited,
Okay,
and that's the one by Harvey Levin,
sure.
and it's written in 1968.
Okay,
Now, I found that in the documents you provided with your report, you didn't provide the full copy of this paper. You only provided the first 3 pages.
Oh, did I?
So the first 3 pages are exhibit in the joint book of documents 1-1383.
Oh, okay. That's an oversight. I remember reading an article that was more hefty like this
Right.
one.
Well, in
So,
fact, just to be on the safe side, I reproduced the entire article.
Yeah.
Although
I
I'm
was gonna
not.
say, I remember
good-
this one being a bit longer, so
Right.
this does look like
It
what
doesn't,
was.
it's not in the joint book of documents, only the first
Oh.
3 pages are. So
Okay.
that's why I reproduced the entire article, but fortunately I won't be going through the entire article.
Okay.
What I did want to go through though was the very beginning.
Mhm.
Now, this article
Mhm.
was written back in 1968 at a time when there was no market for spectrum in the United States. Is that right?
Well, whether or not people were collecting revenues from it, there was certainly a use of it and perhaps a sense in which, maybe we shouldn't be giving it away for free.
And in fact, that's what the article is about, saying
Yes.
we should be harnessing this and
Exactly.
developing a market for it.
Exactly. Probably like, the use of rivers to maybe before hydroelectricity, if you dammed it up and it spun your mill to run your flour mill, we weren't charging for that. But at some point you say, hang on, that's common property, we're natural resource, public resource. Makes sense. The public should benefit from that. So I think, this was written at a time of wanting to say, it's probably, we should have been collecting something. So let's get on it.
Right. Okay, so in the first page, on the
Mhm.
first page of that paper, it says, the second paragraph, as a natural resource, the spectrum is uniquely free from depletion upon use, although clearly subject to, albeit reversible, degradation through pollution and congestion.
Mhm.
Possessing both stock and flow attributes, it is above all a common property or shared resource subject to special international constraints. Would you agree with that?
Yes, it's a shared resource, and you just have to assign the property rights in a way to get the usual Cosian solution. Who will benefit from that because it has value.
So Mr. Levin starts to deal with the sort of geographic connection in
Mhm.
his article at page 447.
Okay.
And I'd like you to turn to that.
Okay.
He says, the spectrum may superficially appear to be a national resource insofar as all radio communication uses the national airspace. This is true even where the signal is transmitted via satellite and must therefore pass through international outer space. And even though still other signals first bounce off the ionosphere beyond the Earth's atmosphere. Nonetheless, one clearly cannot communicate by radio with another country without its cooperation on frequency, time, power, and place of communication.
Mhm.
In some cases, one cannot even use radio within one's own boundaries without at least the forbearance of other nations. These and other limits on national discretion could be said to make the spectrum an international resource comparable in theory to airspace over the high seas, to international waterways and rivers, or even to migratory fisheries, whose efficient and orderly utilization in each case requires bilateral or multilateral agreements. Would you agree with this characterization by Mr. Levin?
I mean, I agree, kind of as Professor Stiglitz talked about 2 weeks ago, along the border, there can be issues about interference, and there's some amount of international cooperation required for perfect use.
Would you agree with his statement that spectrum is comparable in theory to airspace over the high seas, to international waterways and rivers, or even to migratory fisheries? Would you agree with that statement?
I guess comparable in theory, yes. I think it's probably, yeah, comparable in, comparable in theory. But what some of those lack is scarcity that we have with spectrum, that there's a usable block that we can use that is scarce, and so there's interference. The day comes that there's scarce amount of space to fly over the ocean, that will probably maybe lead to some bidding there. So I think in theory it is, but in practice, and this is the article before, 2 articles ago, that the actual usable block of spectrum is relatively small because of our technology. At any given time, we can't use the whole spectrum.
Because of our given technology,
Exactly, because of our
although
given
that may
technology.
change.
And it is changing, right? We have the AM, the FM, and now the really high frequency stuff. Still more to go, but given the usable space is somewhat narrow, that creates the scarcity or the congestion problem. What is that? So scarcity creates value. Congestion is, again, the competing on the same frequency, and the efficient market solution is, some sort of auction or organized system that the other 2 articles talk about. I think they both mention, market solutions. Sorry.
So I'm ready to move on
Sure.
to a different topic.
Okay.
In your original report dated January 31st, 2022,
Okay.
beginning at paragraph 147, and I don't have this in my compendium, but it's up on the screen and it's
Oh.
in your exhibit. I believe it's exhibit 8,
This is my opening
your
report.
opening report
Got
dated
it. Yep.
January 31, 2022.
I see it.
I want to turn to paragraph 147, which is on page
Oh, here we go.
107. Thank you. In paragraph 147, you say, I'm going to start at the halfway through the paragraph, just to save some time.
Got it.
An entity in the Crown's position in 1850 had 2 choices when considering expanding the resource potential of the province of Canada, as does any entity expanding their operations. And over the page, you say those 2 choices are A, buy outright the land and resources, or B, invest with the current owner?
Yes,
And in paragraph 148, you say, whatever the Crown's reasons in 1850, it did not buy outright land and resources. Do you agree with that statement still today?
yes. In that subparagraph, I put a little more meat on the bones of buyout right of assuming the full economics, risk and rewards. I agree today that they did not assume all the economic risks and rewards, and so they didn't buy out right in quotes, as I said in 147A.
So I want to go back, jump ahead for a minute to paragraph 151 on that same page,
Okay,
where you say, economics tells us that if the buy outright price is $10 and the invest price is $1.60, then the investor, here the Crown, has bought a 16% interest. Do you stand by that characterization in your report?
I stand by that characterization. I just note, like, again, the quotes around them, you have to go further up to read what I mean by those. This is like, I sometimes call it, I think somewhere else, $10 is the full risk price for the Crown. $1.60 is not. What's the ratio of those two quantities?
Okay, and we
Yeah.
will go back to those,
Okay, sure, sure.
paragraphs, but what I wanted to get at was Professor Stiglitz in his testimony the other day, the other week, I guess, told us that he would not describe the $10 per person paid to other First Nations as the buy outright price. Do you still consider it the buy outright price?
I consider it the buyout right price as I've defined buyout right in 147A, which is bear the full economic risks and rewards of ownership. I think, I'm not sure I was using it. Well, I wasn't using it there, and you'd have to ask him, but as what is the one-time upfront lump sum price you might pay? And that's part of why the quotes are there, is we're thinking about this in a risk assumption type framework.
In fact, I did ask him, and he told us that he would not call the $10 paid to other First Nations a buy outright price. That's what he told us. Would you disagree with that?
Well, I don't know if he was using buyout right in your discussion with him in the way I'm talking about it here of bear the full risks and rewards. I think at some other points, we maybe in our joint report call it the full risk price. I'm equating those two for simplicity, but
So let's go back then to the paragraphs that I skipped over. Can we start at paragraph 149?
sure.
I understand the Crown began paying annuities on a population model to First Nations in 1818, rather than one-time distributions. However, I also understand that these initial annuities were fixed sums and were not subject to augmentation like the treaties here. The Crown paid approximately $10 per person in these treaties, and that $10 was fixed. Do you stand by that statement?
I do. I should say, I'm not an expert in the historical treaties of Canada. I've been citing, I cite the reasons, the summary there of what was discussed. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And in paragraph 150, you say these treaties signed after 1818 provide useful evidence for the joint venture framework. Do you still agree with that?
Yes,
But you didn't actually read the treaties yourself, am I right?
that's correct. I don't recall reading any specific treaties. I read the summary from the stage 1 reasons.
All right, so your understanding, when you talk about your understanding of the treaties in paragraph 149, that understanding simply comes from the stage 1 reasons, is that right?
Yes, and I think that's what I cite there in those 2 footnotes. Yeah.
Did you understand that those treaties provided $10 per person to every member of the band in perpetuity?
I don't understand. I'm not sure I had an understanding one way or the other as the population worked. I think there was some wrinkle, kind of like in this case, about is it a fixed amount or is there a diminution?
Okay.
Sitting here today, I don't recall all the details about that, but I think
All right.
yeah.
So I want to actually look at those treaties, the ones you've talked about here, as
Sure.
providing useful evidence for the joint venture framework. And fortunately, we have a really handy document from the stage 1 trial.
Okay,
It's behind tab 11. And I've indicated in the index here, this was stage 1 trial exhibit 1-0499, 499.
Where did you say tab 10?
It's tab 11.
Tab 11,
Justice
thank you.
Hennessy, it's the last document in the compendium.
Thank you.
So you'll see from the title here, this is an appendix to the sixth volume of the Journals of the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Canada, dating from 1847.
Yes,
And as I mentioned, it provides a handy summary of surrenders, what they call surrenders for annuities. So if you turn the page, first of all, you'll see at the bottom of the page on the left, there's a chart under the heading Appendix number 66, surrenders for payments made at the time.
I see that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then on the next page, Appendix number 67, surrenders for annuities. And this is where I've highlighted the surrenders for annuities that existed prior to 1850. Here it's prior to 1847. So these are
Okay.
those surrenders starting in 1818 that you talk about in your paragraph 150.
Yes, I think so. I mean, if this is what the court summarized, then these are the ones, you know.
Well,
Yeah.
you had mentioned in your report that you took these population model and treaties that started in 1818. These treaties signed after 1818 provide useful evidence for the joint venture framework. So if it's not these treaties you're talking about, what treaties were you talking about?
I was talking about whatever treaties the court was talking about in the stage 1 reasons
Okay.
from 1818 onwards. If this is the document that was presented in the stage 1 trial, then these would probably be the ones. I
Okay.
didn't do a
You
deep
didn't look at the
dive.
treaties.
Yes, exactly.
So just to look at these treaties now,
Uh-huh.
I've highlighted the ones that mention payment of £2, 10 shillings, because we understand that £2, 10 shillings amounts to roughly $10. At the time it did, understanding that each
Exchange
pound
rates
was
have moved. yeah.
roughly $4. Is that your
Uh,
understanding as well, that these 10 pounds, 2 shillings are the so-called
Yes,
$10
yes.
treaties?
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
£2,
Did I say that wrong?
£10.
Oh, pardon me, 2 pounds,
I
2
understand
pounds, 10
that.
shilling.
Yes,
Okay, so I've highlighted, there are 4 of them.
okay.
Now, they're summarized in the chart and then their actual wording is below. But let's just look at the chart first because it's handy. So the first one, Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. Condition and nature of the annuity, £2, 10 shillings in goods to each member of the tribe, but not to exceed £450 yearly. Do you see that?
I do.
Yes. And so in fact, the annuity paid the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte was less than the annuity paid to the Robinson Superior Treaty First Nations. Is that right?
Oh, you mean the 450 pounds?
That's right.
Yes.
And then the next one is the Mississaugas of Alnwick. Again, we see £2, 10 shillings in goods to each member of the tribe, but not to exceed £642, 10 shillings yearly. So this as well is capped at £642, 10 shillings yearly. Is that right? That's your understanding of reading this document?
That's what that sentence says. Yes,
Thank you. You have no reason to believe otherwise.
that's correct.
Thank you. And then going further down, the next one is Chippewas of the River Thames. And again, we see condition and nature of the annuity is £2, 10 shillings in goods to each member of the tribe, but not to exceed £600 yearly. So here we
Yes.
see these First Nations
Mhm.
may have received $10 per person, but only up to a maximum of £600. Is that your
Yes.
understanding?
That's what this looks like in the chart, yeah.
And finally, the last treaty that could be described as a $10 treaty is that with the Saugeen Indians. And here we're told that the condition and nature of the annuity was £2, 10 shillings in money to each member of the tribe, but never to exceed £1,250 yearly.
Yes.
And the document, this Journal of the Legislative Assembly, goes on below to actually cite the sections of the treaties where these annuities are set out. And I don't think it's necessary for us to go to them. But would you agree that all of these $10 treaties
Mhm.
are limited, are capped at a maximum amount yearly?
The four we've looked at are, yeah, I'm just looking at like the Saggeens of Lake Huron, the last one. Not to increase, I see.
Yes, it
So-
says, let's look at that one. Saugeen's of Lake Huron, which is the last
Over the page, I think, right?
treaty described over the page.
It's the shortest ones. That's
Yeah,
what I started.
That's
with.
the one that has the annuity
Uh-huh.
not to exceed £1,250.
Mhm.
It says, I have therefore to authorize you to issue to each member of the tribe the customary annuity of £2, 10 shillings, the annuity not to increase with the tribe, but to decrease with its diminution in proportion to the lessening of its numbers.
So, and again, having read this for the first time here with you, so that's saying there's effectively a guarantee of $5,000, right? £1,250 equals $5,000, give or take, right? Which is based on the $10 a person, but it can never go up. And in our situation, we have a $2,000 number that is fixed in dollar terms, roughly 160. It can go up. There's a lot more people. Looking at that table you pointed me to, the acreage of each of these is, like an order of magnitude less than the acreage of RST. And the population, I guess, of RST is a lot higher. So I still stand, yeah. I don't
So
know, just
I'm
making
trying-
these observations.
I-
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand then.
Yeah.
I had understood in your report, paragraphs 147 to 151,
Yes,
to be suggesting that if the Crown had paid the Robinson Superior First Nations $10 per person,
Mhm.
they would have bought the land outright. Is that how you characterize that?
well, again, that's why I put the buyout right in quotes. I don't want to get into the title issues, but if that had been the price, would have, so instead of, now I have to do math, but if it was $10 per person times the number of people, whatever number that is, fixed in perpetuity, that would mean that the Crown is assuming all of the risks and rewards of ownership. And
Why did you pick $10?
because I understood that more recent treaties, that would have been, I think, the going rate, if you will, or customary rate, I guess is what.
But that
described.
customary rate was capped.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So the customary rate over this period had been this amount capped. So that's a fixed amount. So if you get that, in exchange, you take on all the risks and rewards. So if you, I should stop using pronouns. If the Crown pays to a group of First Nations $10 a person with a cap, and again, the $1.60 per person is just a per capita way of expressing $2,000. So if instead of $2,000, it was $12,000 or $13,000, and you take on all the risks and rewards of ownership, that's a different transaction, right? That's saying that's buyout right in the sense that I say the Crown will bear the full economic risks and rewards of ownership. If the Crown makes a killing on the land, that's good for them. If the land doesn't turn out to be productive, that's their loss. Either way, the RST on Anishinaabe are insulated. If instead, you only pay a portion of that amount, $2,000 versus what would have been $13,000 or $14,000, I guess, whatever the math is, then you're only taking on, it makes sense that you should only insulate a portion of the risks and rewards. That's the sense in which I mean, if that's the customary amount for which you get a full release, if you will, of the risks of land ownership in exchange for a fixed amount based on $10 per person. You know, you don't bear any risk, you get $10. Alternatively, you get the equivalent of $1.60 per person. You still bear a lot of risk if you're the Anishinaabe. That's the sense, you know.
And in this case, the Anishinaabe didn't get just $1.60 per person. They also got the promise of augmentation.
Exactly.
So that makes the Robinson Superior Treaty different from these so-called $10 treaties, because in the Robinson Superior Treaty, they had an augmentation promise and there was no cap, except, you know, on the distributive amount. Is that right?
That's right. And that's exactly the point. You know, if you're going to have a cap at $10 here, straight line, no matter the outcomes of the world, you start at $1.60, you know, your cap has to be way above $10. Otherwise, who would settle for $1.60 versus $10? So there has to be some variability, the expected value of which is at least, if not significantly higher than
So I'm having
$10.
trouble understanding why $10 is your measure if we know that the Robinson Superior Treaty was very different because it included an augmentation promise. So what difference does it make that some other bands in other parts of the province were paid a fixed total of 450 pounds that happened to be distributed by $10 per person? How does that make, how is that comparable to the Robinson Superior Treaty?
Well, what I'm comparing is the fixed amount and saying if you accept here a much smaller fixed amount, an amount based on $1.60 rather than $10, that tells us something about what we should infer about how much of the variability you should capture.
But it wasn't a fixed amount here, was it? $1.60 wasn't a fixed amount.
No, that's in fact my point, because, you know, if the guaranteed amount had been $9 a person, then, you know, maybe you don't need as much sharing on the upside. I agree with you. The $1.60 plus a share of the value, you know, that's the RST setting, right? That and the $10 on the other side, what is fixed, what is guaranteed in both of those? Only $1.60 here, $10 over here. That tells us something as economists about the potential upside you would expect on the augmentation promise.
So you stand by your position that in this case, the Crown only purchased a 16% interest in the lands.
Yes.
Okay, I wanted to ask you about the numbers on,
Miss,
you know what? I
Would it
only
be
have
an
two
appropriate?
questions and I think
Oh,
they're going to be very short. We might
How
have an
you doing?
exam though. Would you like a break?
It would be great to have.
Okay, I'm
think we need
sorry.
it.
I literally have two questions, but we might have an exam. Sorry.
How are we doing for time? Can we take 15?
this court will recess for 15 minutes, returning at 3:48.
Yeah.
This court is now resumed. You may be seated.
Mr. Hutchings, you told us that you used population projections prepared by Professor Bignami. She had both a low growth and a high growth projection. Do you remember that evidence?
Yes.
And you used that evidence from Professor Bignami for the purpose of calculating the income gap. Is that right?
That's correct.
Did you use those population estimates for any other purpose in your report?
I don't believe so.
Thank you. The last thing I want to ask you about is your slide 313.1. So I'll ask Ms. McNamara to
sure.
bring that up.
Yep.
You probably, do you have it in front of you?
Um,
It'll be on the screen in just a minute. Here it is.
yeah, okay. I remember what it looks like generally.
Yeah, so there were two things I want to ask you about this. The first, my friend, Mr. Schachter mentioned to me,
So this is 313, I think, not 313.1.
oh, you're right.
I have 313 in front of me printed out. I don't have
No,
the
it's
point.
3.1.
Yep.
It'll just be a moment. We'll get it on the screen.
No worries.
If
It's
the
exhibit,
registrar has that.
exhibit 12.
Do we have, does the registrar have that?
Not physically.
It might also be in Ontario's compendium, if you have that handy.
Here we go. It's this one here. It's on the screen now.
Okay, we've got it on the screen now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have you got, you've got it? It's in front
I
of you on
don't
the
have a
screen.
copy in front of me now,
Okay.
but I see it's the whole slide, yeah. Well, if we zoom out a little bit, I can see the whole slide. Okay,
If you'd like, I'm happy to hand you up the copy, Mr. Schachter's copy, if you'd like to have it.
sure.
Does the board have a copy?
I'm just gonna check. Where was I? Oh, in the slide deck, right?
It's the little 3-page printout that came with the slide deck. yeah.
Got it.
Great. It's the last page.
Okay,
It became exhibit 12?
That's right. It was originally exhibit G,
Yes.
and then it was, became exhibit 12.
Got it.
So these are your updated estimates for the Robinson Superior Treaty from 1850 to 2019. Is that right?
that's correct.
And the numbers you have listed here, do they include the updated spectrum revenues as noted in the October 2021 report of ISED?
Yes,
Thank you. And that those would be only up to 2019, is that right?
yes.
Thank you. Mr. Schachter asked me to raise that point to sort of close the loop on what are the right numbers.
Got it.
Okay, just let me catch up for 1 second. So the question was, do the figures here represent the updated ISED figures?
That's right.
Thank you.
The other question I have about this document is, I notice here you've got your nominal numbers. And first off, I should say, to clarify, these are updated nominal numbers. They were updated as recently as yesterday when you discovered some differences in your forestry revenues. Am I right?
The first row, yeah, that's right.
The first row.
The
Sorry?
first row was
Yes.
updated as of yesterday. The other 2 rows were not updated yesterday.
Yes, I'm talking about the net crown resource revenues row was updated yesterday.
That's correct.
Right. And before that, it was updated in late January when you received a new map.
A new geographic area for allocation for past compensation. Yeah, that one.
Yes.
Yes.
So I notice here that with these new numbers that you produced yesterday, your nominal net crown resource revenues is showing here as 1.043 billion.
That's correct.
That's right. And then you do us a favor by bringing this forward to present values at 3 different rates. At the long-term bond rate used by Professors Bodway and Smart. Is that right?
That's right.
And the band trust account rate used by yourself,
That's right.
and also your 60-40 equity to debt approach.
That's right.
And you don't use Professor Kersner and Booth's present value calculation. Am I right?
That's right.
Right. And why don't you include Professors Booth and Kersner's numbers?
I guess because most of the calculation, the differences in the net crown resource revenues are as between myself and Professors Bodway and Smart. You know, Professors Booth and Kersner don't talk about relevant revenues and expenses. I could include their numbers. I just didn't. There seemed to be already a number of numbers on the page.
Okay, because their whole point, of course, is the present value calculation. And here you do have the present value shown, but
Yep.
you've chosen not to include their numbers.
That's right.
Okay. Am I right that a change in the nominal net crown resource revenues of as little as $100
Mhm.
back in the 1870s could make a difference in the present value of multiple millions of dollars when brought forward to present value at your 60-40 approach?
I think I have the present value factors stated somewhere, multiple millions of dollars.
The factors are stated in Professor Smart and Bodway's
Yes.
table 7, I believe, but
Okay, yeah, I just don't have that in front of me, and I've returned the calculator.
right.
But 7.2% for 150 years. I think the present value factor is probably about 100,000. So I guess it could be millions. I don't know, multiple millions or not. Sorry, I just.
But it wouldn't surprise you if, if an increase in net Crown resource revenues of $100 in, say, 1874 could result in more than $1 million when using your present value approach.
That's correct. I mean, that's the power of compound interest over a long period of time. It should double about 10 times, I guess.
Thank you.
Sure.
Those are all my questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have no redirect at all.
Okay. And Mr. Gober,
No, we have none. Thank you very much.
okay. Let me just catch up to the end of this. Okay. Are you up for anything other than to say thank you to the witness?
No, I was just going to say thank you and then deal with the next witness and court scheduling.
Okay, just one moment. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
I realize that I haven't been reminding witnesses or counsel that they shouldn't be consulting during cross-examination. I presume I don't have to, but I was just going to say and thank you for being so respectful of the court and all its rules.
Absolutely. I got to have lunch with the court reporter watching me. today.
As a result.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. You may be excused. You may sit down.
Our next witness is Professor Dribbin, Dr. Dribbin, excuse me. Dr. Dribbin is scheduled to testify on Monday, and I believe it's beginning at 10 o'clock. My friends have agreed to his qualifications and the admissibility of his reports. And that is it for until next Monday, as far as I understand.
And how long do you, I realize that I may have made a big mistake not being involved in scheduling. I'll let you know now that I am noticing that mistake that I made. So how long do you think you'll be in chief?
Ms. Lewis, how long are we scheduled for?
We're scheduled for it.
No, 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 I-
It seemed to be two very different things these days. Like, we're scheduled for a day and a half.
Yeah, I'm thinking that with Dr. Dribbin, it would probably be about a day and a quarter
Okay,
to a day and a half.
that you're not going to hit the 2 days.
No, I don't believe I will hit the 2 days.
Okay, thank you. And the week is, I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. The week is 4 days to, oh, no, I do. 4 days Dr. Dribbin, and then population.
It's 5.
Oh, it's 5.
February 27th to March 3rd.
Oh, can I see that one, please? I'm sorry, I didn't bring that one. Okay, and so that 5 days presumed 2 days for chief. What do you say, first Ontario, what do you say you'll need in cross-examination?
Your Honor, our thinking on cross-examination would be the better part of a day. It sounds like if my friend is going to conclude the direct in a day and a quarter, we might be looking at finishing the second day with Ontario's cross-examination.
Okay. So, okay, that's very helpful. So you'll be ready to go.
I'll be ready to go. Yeah.
Very nice, thank you.
Thank you.
And Canada?
going second, it's hard to estimate, but I can't imagine that I would be more than maybe an hour and a half at most. But we probably, with knowing that sometimes, your estimates actually go over, I think we should probably expect 2.5 days next. We
So
probably-
2.5 out of 5.
That's right, I would think.
So,
Potentially 3, but I certainly don't think, I think we're all agreed that we full 5 days.
all right. Well, 2.5 is a lot less than a full 5 days. And I raise this, I don't expect there's much we can do about next week. But when I look at the 3 weeks for the witness Von Gernert, and I'm sorry, I'm not sure if it's Dr. or Professor Von Gernert, I would like Ontario to make a very, very special effort to estimate their chief in a realistic way, to make sure that we have not booked what appears to be close to 3 weeks, if in fact we don't need anything near that. And I say the same for Ontario's Smart and Bodway. I'm going to ask you to come if you can on Monday with a much more laser focus on your needs. Those are the two biggest. I think maybe then we get to Canada's got a big I'm just looking at Canada at the end of March, beginning of April. It doesn't look like there's any huge chunks there.
I would like to explain though, yeah, we have Professors Mintz and Mr. O'Riordan, and then Professors Kersner and Booth.
Yes.
You'll see that we have indicated a Mintz O'Riordan Flex Day.
Yes,
That's because we are expecting 2 days on the stand for each of them. But Mr. O'Riordan has a potential conflict as well that week. So we wanted to save that 5th day in case he's not available on the Wednesday or the Thursday.
and that's when his conflict might be midweek.
Yes, and we will know what it has to do with is it's dependent on when the federal budget comes down. So we don't know that date yet, but if he's unavailable as a result of the budget having come down, then that's why we're setting aside that Friday
Okay,
as a flex day. But the intention is that all of Canada's witnesses will spend 2 days on the stand, hopefully less than a day in chief, and then cross and redirect. We think we should be able to finish them each in 2 days. That's what we're hoping for. That's what we planned.
okay. So the schedule I'm reading, which I believe came from you, has 2 days off in the week. Are you looking at the same schedule?
2 days off in the week of,
Mintz and O'Riordan. It has
I'm
3
sorry,
days.
you're probably not looking at the right version.
Ah.
It's,
Okay,
are we off the record?
you can be, yes.
I'm very sorry.
Oh yay, oh yay, oh yay. The sittings of this quarter now concluded. Long live the king. Thank you.